Welcome aboard.
Welcoming to the stage Axios Pro Energy and Climate Policy reporter Nick Sobczak.
Well, thank you for being here, everyone. What a great crowd. Great to see you all here today to discuss the impacts of the IRA on the clean energy industry. For those here in the room and watching online, you can follow along with the event using the hashtag Axios Events. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage our first guest. He is a big champion of clean energy on Capitol Hill, California Congressman Mike Levin.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. And I think we should start with the IRA. That is what we are here to discuss. I think we're pretty early still in the implementation process, but there are plenty of polls out there that show Americans aren't super aware of the law and what it does. And when you think about the election this year, what is the best way to talk to voters about this huge set of climate investments? Like, how do you get people to care about this?
Well, Nick, thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody for coming out. We're coming off a primary election just last night in California, where I think, as is the case all across the country, clean energy and clean tech and the jobs that are being created, the economic opportunity, all of that is on the ballot. And I think overwhelmingly the message is that if you look at the IRA already, 270,000 good paying jobs in solar and wind and battery storage and EVs, $300 billion roughly of private sector investment. I think it's even higher. I was with a Republican colleague, I won't say who, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I was with a Republican colleague the other day who said the IRA, half that money, over half that money is going to red states and red districts. How did you guys do that? I said, well, we were trying to do that. The market determined where those investments would go, but they should benefit red states, blue states, just the same. So I think over time, people will also save money on their energy bills. The estimates are around $1,000 a year, which is real money for people, keeping that money in their pocket so they can have more money for other things. So I think the key here is implementation. I know you're going to be hearing from my good friend John Podesta and from Secretary Granholm. This is the year of implementation, and we have to make sure that we do this right. And I know we've got the right people in the right places in the federal government who can make sure we're delivering on the promise of the IRA. We have more work to do, and I know we'll talk about that.
In terms of implementation, what worries you? What are the things that you are concerned about moving forward, both with the IRA and also how the private sector responds to the incentives in the IRA?
Well, I came into Congress in 2019 after having been in the clean energy industry for quite some time. Sean Casten, some of you might know, and myself, we both, to my knowledge, we were the first two to run explicitly as clean energy people, and turned out to be, I think, a pretty good electoral strategy. At the time I was told, don't run as a clean energy person, but I think it worked out just fine. But what I know from those days is that clean energy companies and businesses who are making choices about whether to invest, consumers who are making choices about whether to invest in clean energy technology, they need predictability. They need to know that those tax policies will be there, those incentives will be there. So I think that 10-year time horizon was really important. And I think that we got all of that right. You asked what I worry about most. I worry about the transmission and distribution infrastructure that can support all of this new renewable generation that we're going to bring to the grid. Jesse Jenkins from Princeton, you might have seen his analysis. He says there's 1,280 gigawatts waiting to be connected to queues all across the country of renewable generation. I've seen estimates as high as 2 gigawatts that's waiting to be connected. So we have this massive amount of new renewable generation to be connected, and the rules as they are in place today are insufficient to meet that challenge. It shouldn't be easier to have a multi-state pipeline project than a multi-state transmission project, and we just need to level the playing field. So if we do that, I think we can unlock the full potential of the IRA. We can hit our 40% reduction by 2030 target on the way to net zero by 2050.
So you have a bill that's related to this, which I'll get to in a second. But on this front, we just got 3 new nominees to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They have been working on rulemakings related to transmission and interconnection. How confident are you that FERC can move on its own to start overhauling some of these siting and cost allocation procedures? How much prodding do they need? And
sure, they'll need some prodding, maybe from some of you in this room. But I think in addition to all the work that's happening at FERC with their existing regulatory authority, I do think they need new authority to be able, particularly to cite multi-state, multi-gigawatt projects. If you look at some of the projects that I remember from my days, whether as an attorney or in industry, those projects are still going through the interconnection process today. Some projects are taking 10 years, 20 years, and that's simply not good enough if we're going to meet this moment and actually accelerate the deployment of renewable electricity to match the need, to match our greenhouse gas reduction goals as well as what market demands are. So I do think we need to give FERC that authority on those multi-state, multi-gigawatt projects. That's part of what our bill that I'm doing with Sean Casten is designed to do.
The Clean Electricity and Transmission Acceleration Act.
Got it.
So that's kind of a consensus proposal on what you might call permitting reform among Democrats. Do you see any prospects of parts of that bill getting passed this year, or is that sort of more of a project for a future Democratic majority at this point?
Well, my crystal ball is broken around here. I wish I could tell you with absolute certainty what's going to happen. What I can say first is just want to give tremendous credit to Amanda Schaefer on my team and on all the folks working on Team Casten as well. It's been a truly collaborative effort putting together CETA, and I'm really proud of the fact that it has become the consensus House Democratic proposal on transmission and on permitting. And I think it's important that whenever we're having a discussion around permitting reform, that it is not just an excuse for the fossil fuel industry to get whatever they want, to gut bedrock environmental law, to add to environmental justice concerns, but rather I hope we're able to come together on any sort of permitting reform package and understand that the real need is to dramatically accelerate transmission. Again, to meet this challenge that we face to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what we're hoping to do is to be part of that overall narrative. Again, it is a difficult political environment around here. I will not mince words about that. Even the easy stuff is hard these days. And the hard stuff is, it's highly improbable that you're going to get something that's, even when we have House, Senate, in Democratic hands and in White House in Democratic hands, everything aligned as it was in the last Congress. We saw how we had to thread that needle to go from the clean energy provisions of Build Back Better and then eventually wind up with the pared back version in the IRA. When you have, folks in the House that are in charge who are just doing the bidding of the fossil fuel lobby, it makes things really tough. But we have to keep at it. My experience, I've been at this 5 years now, is that you have to be opportunistic. You have to be prepared and you have to be opportunistic. All the things that we were able to do in the last Congress, whether the IRA or the infrastructure law, CHIPS, you name it, all was because we were prepared. In many cases, those bills, the foundation for those bills had already been written by, for example, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. If you go back to 2020, I was proud to serve on that committee. We came out with a very bold report of all of the different legislative proposals at that time that had been introduced in the House dealing with clean energy and climate policy. And a lot of that became Build Back Better, and then a subset of that wound up as the clean energy part of the IRA. My point being, be prepared, be opportunistic, and good things will follow.
Have you talked to any Republicans about CETA?
All the time, all the time.
What's their reaction?
I don't want to get them in trouble. I think there is an education that has to occur that transmission lines are not your enemy. And we can have great clean energy jobs of the future in the red states, just like we can in the blue states, and that it is not going to be a zero-sum game where if you build transmission and you have the grid of the future, that overnight you're going to lose all of the existing legacy energy jobs in a particular state or district. So that education is ongoing. I would love to tell you that I had, scores of enlightened colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Unfortunately, we are also up against very powerful interests who fund campaigns. And campaign finance reform, I think, is at the root of a lot of this, as it is many problems in this town. When you think about the overwhelming popularity among the general public for transitioning away from fossil fuels towards a clean energy future, reducing costs, improving emissions, reducing pollution, all those things are wildly popular with a vast majority of the American people. But yet we have trouble sometimes getting things done in Congress. When I came to Congress, I was told, you can't get clean energy policy done in Congress. And of course, there's a legacy. People will talk about, Waxman-Markey or whatever else, and they'll say, well, you can't get it done. And that was true until it wasn't. Because again, we were prepared. We had the amazing leadership of Speaker Pelosi. And we had, again, a supportive White House and a supportive Senate, and we were able to get the biggest climate bill in the history of the United States across the finish line. And I give a great deal of credit to my friend John Podesta, who you'll hear from, and Secretary Granholm as well.
When you think about the next opportunity for an energy and climate bill, whether that's 2025, whether that's farther down the road, in addition to the transmission and permitting issues that we've been talking about, what is in that bill? Like, what was left on the cutting room floor of the IRA, of what became the IRA?
Well, I think transmission's key, but when you look at the analysis that was done back during the Build Back Better negotiations, there was a kind of a bang for the buck analysis that maybe some of you saw. And the tax policy ranked number 2, but number 1 was some sort of cap and trade or carbon tax policy. I know Tina Smith had a proposal that ultimately didn't make it. So obviously there is still a need, and 40% by 2030 is a great start, but it is only a start. Ultimately, we need to act on climate in a manner that is commensurate with what science demands we do. And so we're not there yet. And I look at this as a parent. My wife and I have 2 young kids. My daughter's actually 10. She turned 10 last night, or yesterday. I was here. What can I say? But my son's 11, my daughter's 10, and thinking about when they're my age, when they have kids of their own, grandkids. I know you probably hear politicians talk about their family a lot, but for me, it really resonates with me. Like this, we're going to leave this mess for them, one way or the other, and I want to leave them with better air quality, better water quality, and a more habitable planet. And in California, I don't know how many of you have California roots, but there you go. For us, it's not theoretical that the climate crisis is happening. We're living it. We see it in fires and floods and droughts. And in my district in particular, the beaches are eroding, the bluffs are collapsing. It is a real challenge. But also, if we were able to harness the opportunity that it presents, I continue to believe that accelerating the deployment of clean energy is the greatest job creation and economic engine that we could possibly imagine for our lifetimes, if only we're smart enough to harness it. Because when I think about 20, 30, 40 years out, we're all going to be using new technologies to generate electricity, to build buildings, to to move goods around, move people around, grow food. All that's going to change. And I think the question is whether or not we're going to invent all those those technologies and have that job growth and have the manufacturing here in the United States, or whether we're just going to be using technologies that are manufactured and invented elsewhere. And I know where I want America to be. I want us to continue to lead in this industrial revolution, just as we have in other industrial revolutions.
Real quick, we only have a minute left, but I want to talk about nuclear waste because I know this is a huge issue for your district and for you. You voted against the House nuclear licensing package that was on the floor last week. I understand, in partly because of concerns about spent fuel. Just what do you think is next here in terms of your consent-based siting legislation and this issue generally?
So I personally do not believe we should be building new nuclear until we have dedicated ourselves to solve the current problem around spent nuclear fuel in the United States. And I have a bipartisan caucus with my friend Chuck Fleischman, where we are dedicated to moving forward on a consent-based siting process for a new storage site or sites. I give tremendous credit to Secretary Granholm working with her, and we've been able to secure about $100 million towards consent-based siting for spent nuclear fuel. But this isn't something that we can ignore. My district and other districts across the country, about 80 sites in about 34, 35 states with significant nuclear waste concerns. We've got to work together and we've got to fix it.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us here at Axios, Congressman. And one quick plug before we move on. Be sure to subscribe to my newsletter, Axios Pro Energy Policy. I co-write that with my colleague J.L. Holzman, and we dive deep into what's happening on energy and climate on Capitol Hill. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Welcoming to the stage Axios publisher and View from the Top moderator, Nicholas Johnston.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for being here on Super Wednesday. I hope you didn't stay up too late for Super Tuesday. Maybe those late night results surprising from American Samoa. Either way, you're up early today. Thanks for joining us at today's event on clean energy jobs. First, thank you to all of the folks who are subscribing to our Axios products. Like Nick said, our Axios Pro Energy Policy, I think, is the best in the business. Axios Generate, our energy newsletter. We couldn't do anything at Axios without the support of our readers, so thank you. And we definitely could not do anything without the support of our partners. And so a huge, huge thanks to Elemental Accelerator, Ceres, and Climate Power for making today's morning's conversation possible. I did want to do a quick shout out. Climate Power will be releasing their big energy climate jobs report yesterday at climatepower.us. I think we're showing pieces of it up on the screen, but you can dig a lot deeper onto climate jobs on that starting tomorrow. And now for our View from the Top segment, I want to welcome to the stage Don Lippert, CEO of Elemental Accelerator and founder of Earthshot Ventures, and Alan Blue, co-founder of LinkedIn. Don and Alan, come on up to the stage. Welcome to Axios. Great to see you. Welcome. So we were talking earlier before we came out here about the line that was out the door and around the block beforehand. And we were like, what could possibly be driving people out here this early in the morning? And Don and I, we were talking, it's the IRA. Of course, people love talking about the IRA. So Don, from your standpoint, for the promise of the IRA for clean jobs and that kind of investment, like what more is needed for these visions to become a reality?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. So we're at a huge moment right now. I think we're writing history around climate finance deployment, what this looks like. And the way we think about it, 15 years ago when I started investing in energy companies and climate companies, there was so little investment dollars and venture capital, and we needed way more of that. Now we have 70 times the amount of venture capital that we had then, so it's starting to flow. And then about 5 years ago, we're investing in companies, but we're saying we really need policy leadership. We need those government signals. Now we have the Inflation Reduction Act, we have other sort of seminal legislation in the US, globally. And so, Elemental Accelerator, we're a nonprofit investor. So that means that we invest in technologies with deep community impact across energy, transportation, food and agriculture, water. And so we're always trying to invest at the edge of where we think investment needs to go. And what we're seeing now are two really significant opportunities that we have to address to really unlock the potential of the IRA. One is bringing in as much private capital and more as we have public investment. So really building that bridge between what the public side is now doing, we have IRA and government investment. We need to leverage private capital there. And that's a lot of the work that Elemental does, is trying to bring in that catalytic capital to build a better bridge. Elemental is seeded with public dollars from Department of Energy. We'll hear from Secretary Granholm later, and now is philanthropic and other dollars. So bringing dollars in, being catalytic and attracting private dollars over. I mean, that's, we've invested about 150 companies, and we see 10 times the amount of private investment for every catalytic dollar we put in. So that's first. Yeah. And then the second thing is that we are ready to build. And building requires workforce, it requires people, it requires local workforce. And so that's the second piece.
All right, well, this is a perfect segue to our friend from LinkedIn here. I love talking to Alan, who has such, I think, a granular view of the workforce. So tell me from your vantage point then, if the money is beginning to flow, none of this stuff happens with jobs, what needs to happen then to get the workers in place for these kinds of things?
Yeah, it's an amazing challenge. So remember talking to somebody at COP about the possibility of putting batteries on the grid. And he was like, we have 2 terawatt hours of batteries attached to the grid right now. We need 200. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to double capacity every 2 years for the next 15 years. And you look at that and you're like, where are the people going to come from to do all that work? Because that is huge, and that is not the only place. It's not just batteries. It's every component of the climate transition. So government obviously has a role to play.
Right.
Policy set in order to ensure the right kinds of investments are being made. But the 3 big players who matter the most are employers. Employers have got to figure out a way not only to bring new people in, but also to reskill their current workforces. Second is people who are making investments. So the work that you're doing, and one of the reasons that LinkedIn has been supportive of everything you've done for the last few years, is figuring out a way to bring all kinds of talent to the table is something that investors need to think about, because investors need to understand that the investments they're making rely on the presence of people to actually do the work. And then finally, employees. If you are a person who is thinking about a career, consider a career in climate, because there is going to be an absolutely amazing number of roles generated worldwide over the next 30 years, and it's a good spot to be.
I mean, is that a little bit why the two of you are on stage, Don, why Alan joined you? Is like, from the money standpoint, it's encouraging that they need to think more about the people element of this. I mean, and so what is the message that you would sort of have to other people in the investing space on how they should approach this and how they should figure out like that next piece of the puzzle?
Well, so first of all, I think it's important to realize that these jobs are coming and they're here. I mean, since the IRA was passed, Climate Power's report shows that 270,000 jobs have been created in clean energy.
Is that enough?
It's not enough. We're just getting started. There's so much more to do. And I actually checked Elemental's website this morning. Across our portfolio, there's more than 600 job openings. So they're happening. And but we need so many more. And they're across data, engineering, technicians. They're really across every single field you could imagine has some touch on climate. But I'll give you sort of one example that in addition to sort of bringing people in from all those fields, we also need training and skilling around these fields. And some of them are new. So, we made an investment in a geothermal company doing advanced geothermal, and we have a plant going in Utah, and we need workers for that plant, and there aren't just workers sitting around who have advanced geothermal expertise waiting to be hired into that plant. So, along with investing in the company, we're also investing in the community colleges, starting apprenticeship programs, really thinking about how to bring workers from oil and gas where they have deep expertise that's super relevant to this space and can be brought into clean energy as well. So we're thinking about how do we help the private sector really get ready. And the magic right now of the IRA is that we have, for the first time, a federal policy that says, don't just build projects, but we'll give you more tax credits. We'll give you more dollars if you also invest in workforce and think creatively about the local workforce where you're building.
Well, Alan, you're kind of on the cutting edge of this. Like, we talked about this at COP, about how, where do we identify these workers, or at least willing workers, and then how do we turn them into the type of workers we need? Where are we in that journey to prepare for this?
So, as Don said, we're right at the beginning of that journey. So right now, we know that there are many more people pouring into the world of of renewable energy and of battery manufacture and of EV manufacture in the US and worldwide. It's going to be followed up by a tremendous surge as every single industry needs to decarbonize. So the kinds of skills that are required to do that, things like carbon accounting, supply chain management, those things are actually really tough and unfortunately really rare. Only about 1 in 8 professionals in the US has a green skill as part of their resume. And people who are hiring are still looking for people who have skills. So this is where fascinating projects like EDICT, which is a project that Elemental Accelerator is running, which sets up internships and other opportunities for people who come from backgrounds which you normally might not consider for somebody to come in and work on climate tech or climate work. Because in the end, what's going to happen is any company who's working on climate is going to be in the same position that a Silicon Valley company was 15 years ago looking for engineers. They're going to do crazy, interesting stuff to be able to attract the talent they need. EDICT is a good example.
And then to train those workers is just a little bit of an element, like it's not like we have time to go get a 4-year, 6-year advanced degree in these kinds of skills. It needs to happen much faster at the workforce, at the investor level. Like, where is really like the inflection point of who is like providing those workers those skills?
So right now, those skills are being, it depends on where you go in the world, but right now those skills are being provided by trainers who are interested in staying ahead with their workers. But there aren't enough people who are actually doing that. This is why employers are so important, because employers need to think about their current workforces, where they have all that experience working on things and making changes internally, rather than trying to train a whole new generation of people. We don't have time to wait for that generation to arrive.
Yeah, and I'd say across the companies where we're investing, what we're seeing on the ground, we have more than 300 projects in our portfolio that are ready to go in the next sort of 18 months, and they need some combination of catalytic capital and dollars moving in and workforce. A lot of those companies are investing in the workforce side themselves, and they're being supported by sort of clean energy policy and the federal government approach to this. But this looks like conference rooms in Georgia with 30 people learning to be like electric vehicle station technicians, so that when you're going to visit, when you're trying to plug in your car, you're not getting an out of order sign.
Yeah.
This looks like community college classrooms across sort of like Michigan and Arizona, where people are learning these skills with companies with a job right on the other end. So this is happening kind of on the ground in those places.
So what I'd love to leave here on is a call to action. What I think is fascinating about this is that we have a lot of folks here in the room who wrote the IRA or think they wrote the IRA. Here are people who are actually implementing, are living on the ground, figuring out how to build these things and hire these things. What is the message you would want to leave for a Washington, D.C., a policy crowd, on how to help folks like you who are on the ground doing the work?
Yeah, I guess I would say I started Elemental in Hawaii. What we learned in Hawaii working on this on the ground is that you have to be working closely with local communities. If you're trying to get a project done, sort of that relationship, that reciprocity is required. And then what we learned when we were scaling Elemental beyond Hawaii to the US and now globally is that's actually true everywhere. That's not limited to Hawaii. And so we have really concrete ways to help companies think about partnering in local communities. Specifically, we require and ask companies to pay local partners in all the places where they're deploying. And that could be an environmental justice organization, a community college, it could be other kind of local partners. And we don't just do this out of kindness of our hearts. We think this adds specific business value. And 93% of the companies that are doing this agree. They say that working with a local partner on the ground and paying them for that expertise, just as you would an electrician or general contractor, leads to project success. And actually, I challenge all of you to also try this, to engage a local partner in this way. It is not easy. There's a lot of pieces that need to come to place. But if you try it and you become one of the 93%, let us know. Maybe Axios will write about you. But this is, I think, what we're seeing now with the Inflation Reduction Act is finally an alignment between getting the projects done and getting communities on board and bought into this. And so we're seeing that scale across nonprofit investors, across the biggest sort of funder in our space, across the federal government, and other investors as well. So I challenge everybody to take that approach.
and policymakers, if there's a way that you can think to make investments in workforce part of the way people think about investments in climate stuff all across the United States, that would be amazing. Even a small investment in workforce, which becomes a standard part of the way we do our investment, would make a big difference. And I know it's a thing President Biden talks about, but labor actually has a big role to play here. So ways to encourage organized labor in the United States to participate in this skilling,
Right.
because they really are, in many ways, the first line to reach these workers.
Perfect. All of you folks have homework. Don and Alan, thanks so much for being here, and thanks to Climate Power, thanks to Ceres, and thanks to Elemental Accelerator for making today's conversation possible. Stick around, we've got more coming.
Thanks, Nick.
Please welcome to the stage Axios senior climate reporter, Andrew Friedman.
Hey everyone, this is a really great crowd seeing this for the first time. A quick reminder and shameless plug, if you do not already sign up to Axios Generate, our climate and energy newsletter that I co-write with Ben Gieman, who will be on stage shortly. Please sign up for the latest on energy and climate news. Now I'd like to introduce our next guest from the White House. Please give a warm welcome to the newly retitled Senior Advisor to the President for International Climate Policy, John Podesta. Welcome. Thank you. Well, given that today is John Kerry's last day on the job, congratulations on your new portfolio.
Thank you.
In one of his many exit interviews, just to do some diplomacy questions before we get to IRA.
Okay.
In one of his many exit interviews, he referred to the Dubai Consensus as the high point in the history of climate negotiations for the transition away from fossil fuels sentence. I'm wondering if you agree with that view, and if so, why?
Well, look, I think there's been a road from Paris to Dubai. Let me start by just commending Secretary Kerry. I think we could not have had a more effective, more ambitious leader in international climate diplomacy and negotiations. The president, I think, put a lot of stock into naming him special envoy. That was a surprising thing to do, to name a former Secretary of State to that position and a former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And then he did it with tenacity, with creativity, and produced, I think, really a result over a series of 3 COPs, but particularly in Dubai. It really, I think, surprised people on the upside that in an oil-rich state would be the first time that the global community said with clarity, we need to transition away from fossil fuels, we need to invest in clean energy, we need to innovate, we need to tackle the climate crisis and get to that goal of reducing emissions to the point where we're taking as much carbon out of the atmosphere as we're putting into it. In order to do that, we got to transition away from fossil fuels. So I think it was a very monumental moment.
And what are your goals for U.S. climate diplomacy leading up to and through COP29? Like, how are you framing the next COP, again, in an oil-rich country, in your mind as you take on this portfolio work?
Well, I think we need to build on the momentum. There's still a lot of work to do, I think, particularly on delivering at a global level the finance that's going to be necessary, particularly to help developing economies transition and build strong economies, deal with energy poverty, build decent societies based on clean energy, not fossil fuel. So I think that is going to be a top tier issue. But if you come back to Dubai, where the global stocktake took place, that was a mechanism that was set up by the Paris Agreement to go back and look, how are we doing? Are we making enough progress? Are we going to deal with potential catastrophic effects to human security and national security from climate change? That stocktake took place. But that sets off another challenge, which is to get everyone, including the United States, to put forward more ambitious goals for 2035. We're in the process of thinking that through in the U.S., but I think we need to keep pressure on countries to be, in the parlance of the negotiations, 1.5 aligned. That means try to hold global average temperatures to 1.5 degrees. We're seeing perhaps this year that at least being pushed to the edge, but there's still potential, even if in the context of the current situation, to go towards that. We can still pull back if we do the right thing, and I think that's why, to transition a little bit, that's why the IRA is so important, because it is the largest investment in world history, not just in U.S. history, in clean energy and innovation, in the ability to create a whole new way to power advanced societies.
On the 1.5 thing, saying that like it's flippant, but I don't mean to. It's really the countries look at that as the difference between their very survival and their not. I think most scientists will tell you that we're likely to bust the long-term 1.5 degree goal, but right now we're seeing this year busting up against that. Do you think that fact and the temperature statistics that you've heard month after month after month will actually aid both efforts on getting more consensus internationally, as well as pushing you and your other job to really get as far with IRA implementation as possible? It's kind of a...
Well, I hope so. Look, I think, I take notice of the fact that our July 4th, 2023, our nation's birthday, was the hottest day on record in human history. In human history, I guess. Mm-hmm. July was the hottest month, followed by the hottest August, September, et cetera, et cetera. It was the hottest year. That was partly the effect of El Nino combined with climate change. But the challenges we're seeing in terms of extreme weather, billion-dollar extreme weather events, the fires we just saw in Texas play out, storms, sea level rise, et cetera, ought to get people's attention to say, we've got to deal with this crisis. We've got to do business differently. And as I said, the ultimate goal is by the middle of this century to be taking as much carbon out of the atmosphere as we're putting into it. That's going to take a lot of technological investment. I know that Secretary Granholm's going to be here later. She has a whole suite of demonstrations across a range of technologies that she's investing in. But the basic strategy of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a government-enabled but private sector-led effort to make the kind of investments that we're seeing across the country, north, south, east, west, in these new clean technologies is really, I think, awesome. And it's a good news story. People are going to work. You just heard from on the previous panel, projects are being built, companies are being formed, innovation is taking place. That's what we need in the world.
And On the IRA, one specific question. What do you say to what the hydrogen sector says, that the guardrails we're putting in place on the IRA will stymie the growth of that small, but what many believe necessary industry for decarbonization?
Well, what I say is there are a lot of other people who say, kind of right on. So, who are in the hydrogen business, by the way. Look, I think what we're trying to do is implement a law that makes very clear that we have to account and create environmental integrity in this program. We need that hydrogen, particularly to begin to decarbonize the industrial processes. It'll have. I'll steer her a line before she says it. I think Secretary Granholm refers to it as a Swiss Army knife of clean energy technologies, whether it's in fuels, in industrial processes, etc. Hydrogen and green hydrogen in particular, or carbon-free hydrogen, is really going to be an important fuel source in the future. But we have to build that with integrity. We proposed rules about that. We have asked a bunch of questions. We're taking comment on that. And I think what we have tried to do is be flexible enough, both in this program around the tax credit as well as the 7 hydrogen hubs around the country, the offtake agreement that the Department of Energy is supporting, to be able to get this engine going, to get this industry going, to drive down the cost of hydrogen so that carbon-free hydrogen is being produced at a level that will make it a viable option for these uses. We need that, and we're trying to get the balance right. But we also have an obligation to ensure that we're not in creating a hydrogen industry, actually creating more emissions, but because of the sort of knock-on effects of taking too much clean power off the grid in the production of hydrogen, which is a very, as you know, a very rich credit.
Yep. How concerned are you?
So I'm all about practicality, by the way.
Okay.
at the end, we want to get this right, and I think we've thrown out. As I said, we've thrown out a proposal, some questions, we're taking comment, but we're going to make sure that this industry works and it's producing hydrogen in an environmentally friendly way.
Right, climate friendly way. How concerned are you at all, or what's your view of the durability and resilience of the IRA? You're putting this in place. This is still early days. The administration's working furiously. The secretary is working furiously on this. Yet you look at the possibility of a change of administration coming up soon or coming up later. And I'm wondering how you view its sticking power with the American people.
Look, I think the structure of the program is sort of in 2 parts. One are these support through the tax code for private sector investment. That is happening. Projects are being built. I think the magic of the IRA was that 10 years of certainty that's built into the tax code. That's how people decide to deploy money in a long-term way, in a big way. Those projects are happening, as I noted, all across the country. I think they're very sticky. It's very hard to turn your back on workers, on companies, on businesses that are bringing back to the United States manufacturing, clean technology, the industries of the future. It's very hard to say no to that. And I think it'll be a huge challenge for people who want to reverse course, who want to deny the science, who want to push back to go in the other direction. The other big chunk of the IRA were grants that were particularly in support of communities that often bore the brunt of industrial and power sector pollution. Those have been, we're well on track to put those programs to work. the notices of fund availability are out there. People are competing for that money. Grants will be made. For example, in the relatively near future, we'll stand up a whole green financial system through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That is a program at the EPA targeted at making investments in disadvantaged communities and communities that have often been left out and left behind. That money will be obligated and out the door, so we're pleased about that. But I think these tax credits are going to be very hard to rip out of the tax code. Once they're there, businesses are relying on them. You put a plug in for your newsletter. I'll put a plug in for your reporting. This morning, you have a piece which shows the difference between two approaches, one of climate denial versus one of climate ambition, and reporting on a study that was based on rhodium data, which is kind of the gold standard of climate analysis and climate modeling, that showed that to go backwards, to repeal the IRA, will add 4 billion tons of carbon, the total amount of carbon that's emitted by the EU and Japan combined between now and 2030. And it gets worse and worse as you go on to 2050. So, a lot of questions on the ballot in November, but this is one of two very, very different visions about what this country needs to do to tackle the existential crisis of climate change.
Yeah, and I think a key task for the press is actually to show people the stark differences on climate and,
thank you
and
for
on
doing
other
that.
issues. So, any time really. I have one fun question for you before we wrap up, and that is
It must be on UFOs.
not about UFOs, although I wish I had time for that one. One is you're well known for your passion for cooking. I'm curious about the favorite thing that you most recently cooked. And I know you don't go guided by recipes. This is sort of you on the fly much of the time in the kitchen.
Yeah, my father's family's from Italy, my mother's family's from Greece, so I sort of borrow a little bit from both. So one of the things I recently did, it was just kind of a go-to recipe is a Genovese recipe called burrata, which is sort of like bouillabaisse, but the Italian version, which you can get if you go to Genoa.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Where my grandfather's from.
All right, let's go.
All right.
Thank you very much. That's all the time that we have.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage Axios energy reporter Ben Gieman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I would now like to give a warm welcome to our final guest of the morning, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Hi, Secretary. How are you? Nice to see you. Secretary Granholm, U.S. clean energy investment and deployment is surging, but nothing about the future is guaranteed. What keeps you up at night? What are the biggest hurdles you see ahead?
It is funny that you ask, because I just came from my morning meeting with the leads of the units in the Department of Energy, and I said, I could not sleep last night because I was thinking about the energy suck from AI and what that's going to mean for, and of course, data centers and all of that, and crypto, and how we are going to keep up with that demand, and what we need to do at the department to make sure that we are deploying, which is our motto inside, but also busting down some of the barriers, the enormous number of gigawatts that are tied up at interconnection queues, et cetera. And what do we do in terms of the responsibility of those who want to, who say they want 100% renewable energy, and there's a lot of great companies like that, and how can we make sure that they're contributing to adding that to the grid? So anyway, that literally is what was keeping me up last night.
I'm glad it was an on-point question.
Yes.
So as you've been deploying the infrastructure law and the IRA, what are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned so far that will need to be taken forward as the deployment of these statutes continues?
First of all, let me just say to those of you who helped to write the IRA or helped to write the bipartisan infrastructure law or who are in policy, what an amazing thing that policy actually works. And the amount of investment, I know we've been describing it, it is just astonishing. We keep track of all of the number of factories that have announced they're opening up. I mean, this strategy of reversing the tide of the loss of manufacturing jobs, just in the energy column alone, there's been 500 factories that have announced they are coming to or expanding in the United States, building any number of the products that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. A huge number of those, of course, in the electric vehicle sector and the batteries and the supply chain for the batteries. So number one lesson is for those who are skeptical that policy makes a difference, policy really does work. And the president's strategy about this has been enormously effective. We are, as we go forward in the implementation side of things, I appreciate I appreciate John Podesta, but even in the panel before him, talking about the workforce strategies, because those are very real, and how, it's kind of if you can say any problem is a good problem, if you have to have a good problem, it's trying to figure out, because you've been so successful, how you're going to be able to train all of the workers for those jobs. That is something that we are really looking forward to. The lessons from success are really exciting lessons to try to address. But there's an awful lot of success, so there's a lot of lessons.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about something that's been in the headlines lately. We're seeing a huge amount of consolidation and mergers in the U.S. oil industry. Do you view these gigantic mergers as a headwind to energy transition or a tailwind to energy transition?
I think that, I think one of the things that's good about the mergers is that many of the majors, many of them, not all of them, but many of them have been taking action on climate and clean energy. And a lot of the folks who are small level producers were not as interested or didn't have the resources to address. So I'm encouraged that there seems to be a movement in this direction. Anytime there's monopolies, though, of course, that causes concern, because the president is obsessed about bringing down prices in all places, including for pocketbook issues like gasoline. But from a climate perspective, I'm hopeful that it means that some of the wells that have been producing significant amounts of methane, et cetera, the investments by the oil and gas industry in methane detection and addressing and mitigating, I think maybe, I'm always cup half full, so maybe will help in that regard. I will say, just a plug on the methane, the methane sat that EDF has launched to be able to go around the world 15 times a day to detect and provide objective information. I think that will be a tremendous way to identify responsibility and get companies who are sensitive to public concern to address that too.
And just a quick follow-up on that. Do you have some anti-competitive concerns about these large mergers?
I always have anti-competitive concerns about large mergers. They obviously cause price. Any monopolization, consolidation causes price to go up.
I wanted to ask about permitting, something that you've discussed a lot. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how necessary is major Capitol Hill permitting reform legislation to fully realize the clean energy investment and deployment potential in the U.S.?
Yeah, we're trying to do things on the administrative side. Obviously, we've got a proposed rule to be able to, on public lands, have a 2-year shot clock for transmission, for the development of transmission lines. But we can't do everything. And so I think permitting reform is really important, particularly as I think about this incredible growth in demand. And I will say growth in demand for clean energy, it is also going to be from electrification, as we all know, of transportation, but it's also from all of the expansions of these factories that are now coming to America, which is a really good thing. So my concern about the current permitting system is that it does not allow for us to bust through a lot of the human-created barriers that we need. And so I think permitting reform is important. I will say this. On the good side of AI, I think that AI can be helpful in permitting. And I think AI we're developing a pilot on this on public lands. But I do think that AI can be helpful in really helping to streamline a lot of this. And so we'll be more on that to come.
Speaking of more on that to come, a couple weeks ago at the press club, you sort of teased a trade policy announcement that you said was going to be relevant.
Not ready yet.
Okay. I'll stop there then. I want to ask about something that I believe is near and dear to your heart, which you've already mentioned, which are electric vehicles. How do you sort of prevent, or how do you get over this tension between between the countries and the administration's decarbonization goals and your industrial policy goals, right? I mean, certainly China is making a lot of very low-cost electric vehicles. Should U.S. consumers be able to buy them here?
Well, we are very concerned about China bigfooting our industry in the United States, even as we're building up now this incredible backbone of manufacturing. We saw this happen in the solar industry. We used to have solar. A lot of the solar technology was invented here and was big-footed and pulled away because there was flooding of the market. So we're concerned about that. We also know that if it's built in America and with the incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act, we can get those price points down. And we've seen doubling of electric vehicle uptake last year, and more of that is projected. We're concerned, and of course, Commerce has taken this action this past week, a regulatory action to focus on connected vehicles, and electric vehicles are connected vehicles. That's important. It's important for national security reasons as well. And so we think we can have manufacturing policy, U.S.-made vehicles that are affordable and that it keeps our country safe.
And so ultimately, do you see then an avenue for U.S. consumers once you have the U.S. up to speed and with those price points down? Should it then be a more open competition with China, and should those vehicles be able to come
so here's
here?
the deal. I mean, China is investing, talk about industrial policy. China is investing massive amounts for the purpose of bigfooting. And so we need to understand that it is important for people to buy electric vehicles in an affordable fashion. But we can do that, and we can keep our country safe, and we can install the charging infrastructure that's necessary to take away the range anxiety. I mean, we're at this point now, we're at this kind of, chicken and egg, as everybody describes the charging station and the price points. And the access to the critical minerals for the batteries, because we have to have the full supply chain here, right, if we're going to allow people to take credit to purchase electric vehicles, although, of course, you can lease electric vehicles without that same tension existing. So we are throwing everything we have at it. Mm-hmm. And we think America can be competitive and safe, and we think that there will be an uptake in these vehicles. The fact that you can get a $4,000 credit from the IRA on a used electric vehicle, we want to have everybody having access to it, and we think we can do it without jeopardizing the nation or the nation's competitiveness.
I would imagine that some of the themes that we're discussing, in fact, a lot of them are going to be discussed in a couple weeks at the huge CERAWeek conference. You're going to be addressing one of the largest gatherings of oil industry executives in one place in the world at one time. What will be your message to those oil executives in a couple weeks in Houston?
Well, listen, when I do give it, but I suspect that I will be talking about some of the issues that we have talked about in the past. For example, as was described earlier, I mean, the oil and gas industry, they have huge knowledge of the subsurface. Mm-hmm. We have huge potential with advanced and enhanced geothermal in this nation. And they're in a perfect position to take advantage of that with the huge demand that there is now for clean power. This is not going to be a loss leader for them. This is something that they can really benefit from. So I want to challenge them to think about expanding their portfolio to be more than just oil and gas companies, to be comprehensive energy companies and take on and embrace the clean side. Some are doing some of that, but there's so much work, obviously, that needs to be done. And so I'm sure that part of my message will involve that.
Thank you. Secretary, you serve at the pleasure of the president, but he seems to like you.
The feeling is mutual.
If President Biden is reelected, would it be your desire to continue to serve as Energy Secretary into or perhaps through a second administration?
I have to have that conversation with him.
Got it. And another another thing I wanted to ask about was a huge topic. Another huge topic is the much discussed pause on new LNG export licenses. Can you give us an update on where specifically that process is? I know you've said several times that the national labs are going to be involved. Is there a particular lab, for example, that's taking the lead on this, or where are we about 6 weeks into this?
Yeah, there's the study's being scoped right now. There are several labs that are participating, and as you can imagine, the last time this study was done, we were exporting 4 billion cubic feet of LNG, and now we are at 14, and we're about to double by 2030 just in the stuff that's already been approved and being constructed. And then all of this change has happened in the world as well, with global demand and country pledges, obviously greenhouse gas emissions, and then the question about price, and that's fluctuating all the time too. What does it mean for us at home if you end up exporting, all of that? So all of these questions, and what does it mean in terms of global energy security as well? Because we know that a lot of our allies in Europe want and are getting their supply from us, and that's not being jeopardized, but want to make sure that there's a continuous supply. But a lot of them, the same ones, have said that they're moving away from fossil fuels too. So we have to have a really thoughtful process, because we are the largest exporter of LNG in the world, and we will remain, regardless of what this study shows, the largest exporter of LNG in the world because of what has already been approved. But it is important to take a beat and to say, with all of the changes that have happened, what is in the public interest, which is what the Natural Gas Act requires us to take into consideration.
And I think as we're running short on time, I have a home state question for you. What is a Michigan rock band or artist that everybody should have on their playlist?
Well, I have to say, of course, Aretha, and of course, Bob Seger, two of my oldies but goodie favorites. So I got to go with those.
Great list. Secretary Granholm, I think that is all the time
I'm glad you didn't ask me about cooking. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us in the room and online, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.